Okay, thanks, Allie. So up next, I would like to invite Franca.
Hello, everybody. Not sure how I got nominated for this job, but I'm here to talk about Darryl Tagami. I'm not sure that he would even say that I was the right choice, but he's going to be willing to weather it, I'm sure. For those of you who don't, well, first of all, everybody in the back can hear me, right? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Darryl Tagami is a recognized member of the Science Center and the Honolulu Lab, which was what we were called prior to that time. And, you know, he's if you didn't know him, he was a mix of a field leader, and he was also kind of a data czar. And he did everything early on. He was part of the center. He was doing data support and data collection for some of the early ecosystem modeling. He was part of our assessments for seamount, armorhead, for lobster, for shrimp. He basically was there for the emergence of the coral reef program. He was involved with the FRMD data stewardship and fisheries statistics. So he has always been part of all things that were at the Science Center. Personally, I have always seen Darryl as kind of an indelible character. Okay, I mean, if you didn't know who he was the constant at our center. We have a huge transition of people who come through our center. Okay, you're probably one of that endless stream of people who are going to work at the center and move through. But Darryl was a constant. He was always here, and he was always involved. And so we've asked some people to briefly share some memories here, and we're going to open the floor if anybody has anything that they want to add to it. So if you see a gap that we didn't address, we're going to call you up. I guess I will start with the comments from Bob Humphreys. Bob Humphreys gave me 3 short stories, and I'll spread them throughout. Bob's an excellent presenter, so we really have a huge loss here that Bob isn't here to do it, but I said I would do my best. And I guess I want to start with the final comment that Bob provided in his three little stories. The final comment he gives, he writes, "As you enjoy this Halea event, please keep in mind that Halea and Halea-like events have a long history dating back some 70 years to the beginnings of the original Honolulu Lab at Dole Street. It was typical of Darryl to work behind the scenes in these events, both in planning, the event itself, and cleanup. He was a staunch advocate for Halea and remained dedicated to it throughout his career and even into retirement. He was at the grill last year, okay, working on this. Just as Darryl was part of the new generation in the late 1970s to embrace Halea, Halea needs a new generation to keep it vital as a means to foster connections and camaraderie across our workplace. These routine gatherings were a prize goal for Darryl. Okay? That's why we're talking about it here. This is probably the most important place for us to be talking about Darryl. This is what he basically drove and kept moving forward. So I'm going to ask up the Bruce Mundy as our first speaker. And there he is. Very good. Come on up, Bruce. So we do have a microphone, but Bruce is going to pack away his library voice and pull out his presenter's voice and make sure that people in the back can hear all this.
Okay, I'm going to try. Let me know if you can't hear me. So I'll start off by saying that Darryl was a person who lived life on his own terms, as those of you who know well. And many of the things that he did became legendary, both at the lab and among his friends. He began his career in marine science, like a few of us have done, sorting plankton samples for the University of Hawaii. He was in John Miller's lab, which also included a couple of well-known larval fish biologists as graduate students, Jeff Lease and Bill Watson. Bill is the head of the larval fish program at the La Jolla Center now, and he sent a remembrance of Darryl's early days. He said, and I quote, "Back in the old days, early 1970s, Darryl was a work-study student at HIMB. One thing he was famous for in the lab was coming to work on Saturday morning after possibly too much, or at least too late, partying." Very dark. On a Friday night. He was only semi-operational then, and he even fell asleep over his plankton sample. I don't know, I don't recall that the falling asleep part actually happened very often. Maybe it was only once. But we like to kid him about it anyway. So Darryl's legend began with that. I first met Darryl in 1985 when I arrived in Honolulu, and that's a little bit later than some of the others who worked very closely with him. There were a group that were hired to work in what's now the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, then it was the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. That includes Bob Humphreys, Bob Moffett, Mike Secchi was part of that group, Al Everson, Ray Clark were not here. Now, they were close friends, they were all younger and single at the time. When I arrived, Hazel Nishimura, who was the librarian at the time, took me aside and gave me some motherly advice about how to live in Honolulu and what to do, and I remember her saying very distinctly, "Don't go to Korean bars." That very Friday, Darryl came up and said, "Hey, some of us are going out for a night on the town." Okay, and, well, let's just say the legend continued. His work ethic on the cruises were also legendary. Others are going to tell a little bit more about this, but he was ferocious and energetic in his work at sea and getting the samples, and particularly in herding us cats at the end of the cruise to clean up the laboratory areas and get them to be spotless, or as spotless as the Cromwell could be. He made sure that everything was shipshape at the end of the cruises. I think others will comment on this too, but he was also legendary for being a total carnivore for most of his life. He would not touch vegetables of any sort, including even onions with his main course. He just didn't want them. So imagine our total surprise when Donna, my wife, and I started seeing him at the vegetarian grocery store down to earth on King Street. He was changing his life in the last few years and trying to live healthier. And he looked healthy, very good. I don't think that he ever went quite as far as, say, eating kale, but at least the plant-based food. Just before he passed, as an example of his social activities here, he organized a breakfast for about 20 of us, retirees, over at Nico's. And we had a wonderful time. He was happy, energetic, and it was a great chance to see him at the end. So again, Darryl lived life on his own terms. I believe that he enjoyed every minute of it, no matter what. And I just want to say, a toast to Darryl.
Bonsai.
Bonsai! I can't do that like Darryl.
I'm going to do that later. Okay, real good. Thanks very much, Bruce. Okay, so now I'm not going to have a section for myself to speak on this because there is a fair amount of overlap, so I will add commentary to Bob Humphrey, who very much wanted to be here and speak, and he's giving me stuff to read, so I'm going to read the first one. Okay, so this is Bob Humphrey's narrating at this point in time. My first scientific cruise with Darryl was in the fall of 1977. It is said that you really don't know a person till you have to live with them. How true. At that time, the NOAA ship Townsend Cromwell was the lab's research vessel. The TC was good for all kinds of fisheries ops, but had few frills, cramped living quarters, and when the seas were rough, or even when they were choppy, it rolled like a roller coaster. What made up for this was the crew, an infamous band of characters. I remember boarding the TC for the first time and saw the crew enthusiastically greeting Darryl. I think he had been out only one or two previous cruises, but was already treated like part of the crew. It was obvious that Darryl had this ability to connect with people, find commonality, and turn what could be drudgery into fun. He was fun to be around. In fact, after one particular cruise, Darryl continued to live aboard the ship while it was docked at Kewalo Basin. He would sleep on board, then get up for work, go to the lab, come back to the ship, go drinking with the crew, and then return to sleep on board. This went on for about a week. Our then boss, Richard Uchida, received a call from Darryl's mother, wondering why he hadn't returned from sea yet. Richard called Darryl and ordered to get his butt home tonight. I do wonder about Darryl's mom. what it was like. But anyway, I will go to the next party here. Hang on a second, I've got a list. Okay, Russell Ito. Come up and say a few words. Oh, there he is. Very good.
Thanks, Frank. A lot of my experiences with Darryl is pretty similar to our previous speakers, Frank and Bruce. And the thing funny about Darryl was I knew him before I met him because I was a research associate out at HIMB, and Paul Jacquille had offered me a temporary contract with NIMS. So I took the job because my boss at that time told me he didn't have a better offer. And even though I was working in research, all the shop boys would tell me, hey, there's this guy Darryl Tagami that worked with NIMS, man, you should check him out. And it's like, what are you talking about? You know, I mean, who is this Darryl character? And sure enough, I get to NIMS, and Darryl, I mean, he impressed me because for just an ordinary scientist, for him to be chief scientist, had respect from everyone, the crew, the scientists, everyone on board. And the reason why was Darryl knew how to do logistics. One is that you're always there for the pre-cruise prep. Two is you always help unload the boat when the cruise is finished. Three is he's going to have the best protocols of all the chief scientists. So that was Darryl, because when he wasn't cruising, he was still partying. And just like everyone else said, it was Korean bars, smoking, drinking, and eating only meat. He ate no vegetables at all, full-on carnivore. But the interesting thing is, when you look at Darryl's life, he evolved over time. Like when he was up in the data room, we saw this evolution, and it was shocking because he would have this cup of water and there was a carrot in there, and then the carrot grew into more of a vegetarian diet, so he became omnivorous. But the interesting thing about Darryl was he was still hardcore carnivore, because if he was here today, there would be a pile of steak fat, and he would have that plate for himself. That's what Darryl loved, was chicken skin and steak fat. So another thing about Darryl is, like Bruce had said, we had just recently met. So like I'm really close with the retirees because I'm so old now. I'm one of the senior guys, and so they invite me over. And it was a Tuesday, and Darryl had organized it, and Saturday we had passed. So it was pretty shocking to us, but very gratifying that we had the opportunity to at least connect with him before he passed. I still feel like he's around with us because his personality was so magnanimous. I don't think he passed away. I think he just attained legendary status instead. The last thing that I want to thank Darryl for, or you should be thankful for if you like the poke, was that I was able to make the poke, because last year we met again before the Holiday Party, and Darryl came back from a trip and he had COVID. So guess who got COVID from Darryl? And I bought the fish for the poke, but I wasn't able to make it. And what was the most frustrating thing is, I'm home, laid out with COVID, and then someone sends me a text picture of the boys at the barbecue, and there's Darryl with his mask pulled down, and it's like, man, thanks a lot, Darryl, but hey, hats off to you. We really miss you. You're such the greatest guy, and like I said, he's always gonna be larger than life. He's a great guy. All right, thank you.
This is what he's talking about. Okay, so Bob Humphreys has got a second one here. With Bob Humphreys speaking again. This one in particular, I want you to remember, this is Bob Humphreys speaking. Darryl would come aboard with all of his belongings in a small shopping bag. Darryl's daily attire was definitely minimalist. Straw hat, no shirt, glasses, but never sunglasses. Short pants, black rubber boots. Oh, and he probably packed only 2 pairs of shorts, BVDs, and a couple of t-shirts. Why t-shirts? Because he had to wear a shirt to eat meals in the ship's galley. Okay, I joined in the 80s, so this is in the 70s. I joined in the 80s. He came on board with the same small bag. And one time he came on board and he was horrified that when he grabbed his t-shirts, he happened to have grabbed nothing but tank tops. And all of you know you're not allowed inside the galley with tank tops, which meant there'd be no food for Darryl. And he went around asking everybody if we could borrow one of our shirts, and the answer was, no, you cannot. So Darryl ended up going into the galley by basically first going into the wet lab, grabbing the foul weather gear off, putting the foul weather gear on to go into the galley to get his food. Now you can walk through the galley in foul weather gear, but you can't stay in the galley with foul weather gear. So that was enough time to go through, grab his food, and get out to the aft deck where he would be able to live off of his diet of meat. So I just wanted to clarify that. You would think after a decade he'd have this wired. He didn't have it wired. All right, so back to the story. Let's see where we're at. Okay, then I'm like, why t-shirts? Because he liked to wear a t-shirt to eat meals in the ship's galley. Now about the meals. Like I said, there were a few frills on the TC, but the meals made up for that. We always had a variety of foods, always fresh seafood available to eat on those cruises. But back then, Darryl was a strict meat eater, despised vegetables, and would never pass up a steak for seafood. By the time I got on board, Darryl had already bonded with the ship's cooks and got served the best cuts of meat. It was during the latter cruise that someone tried to play a practical joke on him involving his love of steaks. Now, Darryl was not a practical joker, nor liked to be the butt of one. However, it just so happens that on a later cruise, a young college student decided to play a joke on Darryl. This kid, who was nicknamed Bob, okay, it's a British term, and it sounds like tanker. Okay, so he's used the term about 10 times in here, and I'm on camera, and I'm on the clock. All right, so look, clearly Bob has done some things at my expense, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight that Bob loves Star Trek. Okay, and since Bob loves Star Trek, I feel for this guy. I know what it's like to be the new kid out on the ship, and I identify with it. It's essentially you're the unknown crew member. If you guys know Star Trek, you know what the unknown crew member is. That's the person who doesn't fear so well because he's not a real character anyway. So I'm going to use UCM, unknown crew member, in place of this word. All right? This kid, who was nicknamed the UCM by the scientific party, hatched a plan to pretend to sneeze all over Darryl's steak. So, at one particular dinner, the UCM seats himself directly in front of Darryl and waits for him to get up to retrieve something. As Darryl returns and begins to sit back down, the UCM dips his finger into some water and then pretends to sneeze on top of Darryl's snake. Darryl's face was one of stun, absolute stun. And then it went immediately to rage. And then immediately crew members had to escort the UCM out onto the aft deck. And then at this point in the story, we don't know what happens to the UCM. That's what happens to the unknown crew member. You never know what happens at the end. So after he was escorted out of the ship's gallery, we never hear about him again. Over the years and countless lunches that Bob Humphreys had with Darryl since, he's done various things to protect his meat from being contaminated. At restaurants, if his steak plate also contained a serving of some wet vegetables, he would quickly pawn off his veggies off to one of the other folks, or if not, he would tilt his steak plate upwards so that the vile veggie juices would not seep into his steak. Over the last decade or so, Darryl did start adding veggies to his diet and eating meat less often. This is what we saw, him walking down the hallway at the center. This was it. This was the big concession to adding vegetables to his diet. But be clear, that's how he did it. Had nothing to do with eating it. He was drinking the juice around the carrot. So I think he actually used the same carrot for about a week. Okay, I'm sorry, I digress here. Back to the story. Every once in a while, I would mention the story at the UCM, which, as you all know, sounds like tanker. And we'd share a laugh, and Darryl eventually admitted that as practical jokes go, it was well played. So that was from Bob Humphreys. I'd like to now invite Dave Hamm to come up and speak.
Ho, 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 but I cannot follow that. Holy
I
moly.
don't know, man.
Bob, you're wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
So Darryl was a interesting character, as all of you that knew him, know very well. But they've misinterpreted a little bit about Darryl here and his whatever. If you looked at these pictures over here, almost all of them are the new Darryl that most of you did not know, the old smoking, drinking, part-time bartender character Darryl that I met and worked with in the early 80s and on, and I was a supervisor in the data section for quite a number of years. He wasn't the easiest person to supervise, but he wasn't the hardest one either, and you know, just being who he was made it very special to be his friend as well as his supervisor, for sure. So Darryl, one of the things that that stands out in my mind about Darryl was this transition that he made from the young, carousing, smoking, drinking Darryl that he was to what he became as the older, revived, new life Darryl, who did actually eat vegetables sometimes. At least I never saw him throwing them away and drinking the water. But he had celery in with the carrots too. But he went from that person. It was one of the things that I found that I was the most proud of Darryl. When he made that transition, he quit smoking and quit drinking and still did bartending some nights for a while. And he did that pretty much cold turkey, which was an incredible testimony to his inner strength and power. So that was part of the Darryl that I really appreciated. Plus, the things that he's done, you know, and been part of this. He recognized more than almost everybody else how important it was to love the people you work with, to have the ohana. Sorry. Anyway, Darryl was very people-oriented and was involved in everything because he made it a better place. And my wife just shared with me, her mobility isn't so great anymore. Neither is mine, and a lot of us other non-working people anymore. But anyway, she said, "You remember Darryl last year? And he was here barbecuing and doing all of this stuff and everything. Multiple times he came over. Mundy, do you need anything? Mundy, can I help you? Do you want anything? Can I get you something?" Because he was a people person, and he loved and cared for the people that he worked for. And he made it a much better place to work. So.
So Kimberly, are you ready? Okay. The comments about the transition and how immediate and how direct, that's a really good point. It was like a light switch.
to do with what his doctors told him to.
Yes, indeed. So it seems like you can kind of tell what stage in Darryl's life he came in by how much vegetables there were involved. I met Darryl just before the 1 carat stage. And I did see him, he was out there working whenever a cruise was going out, getting gear ready, helping out with all of those kinds of things that people have to do in order to make the cruise a success. He was a really hard-working person. Yes, I remember Darryl at lunch when he had said before he didn't eat vegetables. But when the doctor told him that he had to eat some vegetables, and he said, well, how do you evolve to that? How do you get to that stage? He said, well, right now you're eating 0 vegetables. So if you add 1 vegetable a day, then you've already improved. So he used to have that 1 big carrot, and he would peel the carrot, and he would wash the carrot, and he would actually eat the carrot. I never saw him drink the water. To where, years later, he did his meat, like say he was coming to a barbecue like this, and then he would eat all that meat, but he would also cut all those lemons. It was like a diet that he did where he squeezed all the lemons, and he drank all the lemon juice and ate all the lemon juice. So he was cleansing his body at the time as well. So yeah, he evolved to, I guess, I never saw him vegetarian. But the other thing I remember about Darryl is, so I came around 89, and at one point I was kind of finding my way around Honolulu, and I found my car, my tire was dead. So I went down to Lex Brody's down in Kalihi, and they said, well, we're going to have to work on the car. And so you want to wait? And I was like, well, yeah, I guess I do, because I don't know how I'm going anywhere for now, and get back here to pick up the car. So I walked into what I thought was a restaurant, and it turned out to be a Korean bar. Right there on King Street, right by Lex Brody's. And I looked inside, there was a few waitresses dancing, and it was a pretty colorful place, and I didn't know anybody. I was trying to kill some time, so they were sitting in the dark. And I saw Darryl. So I saw some of his transitional changes in his life, and I also saw him working really hard with the coffee and cleaning up the back room there. He and Grace were always making sure that people had clean place to cook and chase off the mongoose, and all that kind of stuff. Another thing that kind of exemplifies the way that Darryl worked is how when he took over organizing the annual long line data, Darryl kind of looked at the situation and said, what's going wrong here? Because we're all missing each other. You need data, the data's not ready when it's supposed to be. So he went and talked to everybody. He came to the folks in Westpac Fin, and he says, well, we need this, and we need it by a certain date. And what is it that you need to get that to us? So he talked to everybody, and he found out what were your stumbling blocks for getting that by the date he needed it. Nobody had ever told us when they needed it and what was the cutoff date and all that kind of stuff. And Darryl talked to everybody, and he got everyone to understand and get on the same page so that we could deliver the data that they needed for their annual assessment. And so that's the kind of person Darryl was. I'm not going to melt up here. Awesome person. If you look over here, you can see him in all his stages on the boat working, pounding, making the nets come in and getting the work done and making life fun for everyone else. Honored.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we're at the end for the Bob Humphreys things, and now I'm going to open the floor to people if anybody wants to say anything. This is Darryl the Entertainer. When Darryl and the rest of us biotechs were hired in the late 1970s, we were joining more than just a job. We were the only youngins. All in all, we were like 20s. And then the staff, then primarily local, were our parents' age and older, some nearing retirement. The work culture we stepped into was unlike any I'd ever experienced. We were adopted into this family, and also became part of something big, as many accomplished scientists had conducted pioneering research at the Honolulu lab. We also came in at a time when there weren't many rules about what you can't do. And of course, Darryl fit right in. The editorial group was then staffed by 4 women who took it upon themselves to dole out motherly advice to Darryl, be it suggestions or scoldings. In turn, Darryl would keep them entertained with stories and banter. In the 1980s, when one of the women, Irene, was the first to retire, Darryl and I talked about how we could honor Irene at her retirement party. We talked about doing something new and memorable, like a skit. We wrote a skit about a day in the life of an editorial staff, but to make it funnier, we had to dress the part. I kind of thought this might be too out there for Darryl, but to my surprise, he was all in. We practiced, refined the skit, and we were ready that night. Darryl was absolutely hilarious. It was amazing to see this transformation come over him when he stepped on stage in full dress, heels, and makeup. I doubt anyone who attended that party ever forgot that night. After that success, we were in demand at future retirement parties.
Yes, yes.
How many of you have seen a skit at these retirement parties or anything else? How many of you have seen them? I want to know how many are still around and have seen it. It's unusual that they occur. They happen through time, but you don't see skits in other workplaces, just so you know. It's a high-risk venture, okay? All right? That's what sets this place apart. Now, Darryl retired a few years ago. Darryl still emailed me and still called me periodically out of the blue to talk about things. Last year, I ran a video here, a stop-action video, and I ran a stop-action video before. Each time, Darryl came up, sent me emails, and gave me feedback on how I could have improved it and what I could have done. And I was so impressed that a guy looked at it and spent that much time rewatching it and saying, you could have done this and you could have done that. And I was thinking, what a shame. Last year's video had Darryl in it, but I basically changed him into, I can't remember who the narrator was, but he was one of the famous British wildlife narrators. But I should have gone after Darryl. I should have had him do the voicing. I should have had him be the guy to do it. So anyway, that's the end of this. I'd like to open the floor to anybody who'd like to, if you see a gap and you want to speak, we'll do it. Otherwise, I'm going to call Don up, and Don will wrap us up. So anybody who feels like we've missed something, let us know. Come up and speak. And otherwise, I'm going to wait a minute or two for people to get up their courage. Just think about that there's not a camera here filming you. Okay. Don. That's all right. We worked hard to try and cover the gambit, so I appreciate our speakers. You did a great job. We're going to leave. The ones who were present, and Bob Humphreys, who clearly spent some time putting stuff together. I'm going to hand it over to Don. Don's going to close us out. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Frank. I helped recruit some speakers for this portion of the agenda, and quite a number of them declined, saying they would not be able to hold it together while they were up here, and I probably should have joined that group because it'll be a challenge. Darryl was a dear friend, close colleague, mentor, hero, brother, all the above. I met him in 1987 when I first started working at Dole Street. I had the worst job possible. I was working in a formaldehyde-infested lab with jars of leaking specimens, and I was eager to get out of there every day. And somebody told me, I think it was Craig Rowland or Kevin Landgraf, said, oh, if you want to go to lunch on Fridays, go just wait under that tree at 11:45, and there's a bunch of guys that go out and get lunch. And I was so eager to get out of that toxic lab, out of the formaldehyde fumes. Every Friday at 11:45, I'd go wait under that tree, and Darryl and Bob and Bruce and Mike Secchi and others would show up, and we'd all go out to lunch, and that's how I got to know them. I was a total outsider, but they became my family, my ohana. I was new to the islands. For those of you from Hawaii, by now you know I'm not from here. By the way I talk, I'm not from here, but in 1984 or so, I was new to the islands, needed a ohana, and I found it with Halea and the workplace. And you'll notice we're handing out punch. So I'll get to that in a second, but this is the Darryl punch, and I will talk about that soon. So please take a Darryl punch if you're going to partake in the toast that I'm going to do in a few minutes. Going back to Darryl and the 80s, I joined that group, and we went to Friday lunches religiously for like 37 years, I think it's been. We did it in person. We've done it virtually during retirements and COVID. We've continued that tradition.
Bruce is a solid member of that Friday lunch group. So there's others here that wish they could have. There's others that wish they could have been here, but Bob couldn't be here. Mike couldn't be here. Evan Howell used to be part of our Friday lunch group, but he went on to faraway places. Speaking of that, John Henderson emailed me. He couldn't be here for this event, but he said, "Don, why don't you do a bonsai toast?" And I thought about that, and I recalled what we did for Evan Howell during his going away. That was during COVID. So Evan Howell went to DC during COVID. We did it going away. I was talked into doing a bonsai toast for him. I think I was MC for that event. I think Ariel might have been sick or something. I can't remember. It did earn me a written reprimand for doing that job, but that's a different story. It had nothing to do with the bonsai toast. But I told Darryl, why don't we do a bonsai toast for Evan? Because Evan was part of our Friday lunch group. And Darryl and I, being of Japanese descent, I thought it'd be perfect to do the bonsai. But Darryl said, no, can't do that. That's inappropriate. In Hawaii, we just do bonsais for weddings, and we do it for the bride and groom, and we do one for the guests. It's inappropriate to do one for Evan. I said, no, but it's going to be really fun. Let's do a bonsai toast. And he just kept saying, no, it's inappropriate. And the more I thought about it, I was thinking, this is Darryl telling me about something inappropriate. And I was thinking, it took me a while to absorb that. But anyway, he didn't do the bonsai toast. I couldn't talk him into it. I did it. I didn't get a reprimand for that. It was for something else. It was awesome. It was great, even though it was virtual. So we are going to do a bonsai toast. For those of you who don't know what a bonsai toast is, it's a Japanese thing. And the Japanese people in Japan, they don't do it anymore because it reminds them too much of World War II and kamikaze pilots and such. But in Hawaii, we still do a bonsai toast, especially for weddings. And the first one is generally for the bride and groom, and the second one is for the guests. So I'm going to do 2 bonsai toasts. The first ones will be for Darryl, and the second one, which is typically reserved for guests, I'm reserving that for my dear sister Allie Bayless and my brother Nico, who are also departing. And I think at one point Darryl, when I said the 442 guys do it for people that are leaving, and we shouldn't do it for Evan. But I said, well, Evan, he's going to DC. Anyway, sorry, nobody laughed. I got that joke. So we're going to do bonsai toast. Does everybody have something to drink? Thanks, Frank. Did you get one?
I'm sorry.
So Darryl's punch is famous because when I first started working at Gold Street, every holiday party, Darryl would make the punch. He would put so much time and effort into the punch, and it was a mix of 7-Up, pineapple juice, ice cream, and strawberry Malolo syrup. And he had the blend down perfectly. I winged it. I don't know how this is going to taste, but it is alcohol-free, so it's fine to drink. There's no alcohol in it. This is Darryl Punch, and we haven't done it for years. I think the last Darryl Punch was probably at Dole Street. We thought about bringing it back as we did events at RSC, but we never did. But this year I thought it appropriate to bring back the Darryl Punch. So the first toast will be to Darryl. Now I'm going to shout, I'm going to say some words. I'll say bonsai, then you say bonsai. I'll say bonsai again, you say bonsai. I'll say bonsai for the third time, and then you say bonsai, then we drink. And then we're going to do a similar sequence for Ali and Nico.
So thirds.
For what?
Split the drink in thirds?
Yeah, split the drink into,
Okay.
allocate it however you want. Just don't drink it all in the first bonsai. Okay, so here we go for Darryl. Shinru, Shimpu, bonsai! 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 I might have massacred those words. Russ, did I get that right? I don't know. Okay, anyway, we're going to move on to the second toast, and this is for Ali and Nico. Rohin no Minnesota! Bonsai! 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 Frank or Ariel?
No,
It's all you.
Thank you, Don. That was beautiful. All right, I'm going to invite Charles up next.
So no break.
Did you want to
No,
break?
I don't. Look up. Yes, Susan, this is dessert, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Susanna or the rest of my dessert people, you guys want to come up? There's no easy pivot. We're moving into the dessert competition reveal. There's no great pivot from going to remembering one of our lost employees, former family member, to talking about desserts, particularly when everything was about meat and a little bit about vegetables, and there was nothing about dessert. I don't know where Darryl fell on the dessert spectrum, but I know that he cared about celebration and community, and so that is what we're going to lean into here. So it is my honor. I have a